Hello, Fred.
Hi, how are you?
I'm okay, and today we are going to talk about your favorite author, Chekhov. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, and my question is, when did you first hear about him?
Oh, well, yeah, I think when I was in university, probably, yeah, maybe first or second year university, I heard about him. So a long time ago. I bought a paperback collection of stories by Chekhov, stories and plays. And I must have been 19 or 20. I read some of them. I didn't read them all, but yeah, so a long time ago.
And how did you become interested in this writer?
Interested in Russian literature in general, even as a young man. I read Crime and Punishment when I was 17. And, a friend of mine was a big fan at university. One of my friends, he was a big fan of Turgenev. He was lending me books by Turgenev. So I was already aware that Russian literature has a really high reputation. So I think I started reading it. It's 19th century literature. I really enjoyed it. At that time, I was reading all other short story writers too, like Maupassant, Somerset Maugham. So I really liked the short stories. Also, maybe as a young man, my attention span was not so good. So it was easy to read short stories.
That kind of literature, yeah. And what was the first short story by Chekhov?
That I read it.
Yes.
I can't remember the title now. It's about, I think it's, in Russian, it's Toska. In English, it's about the
sadness.
Yeah, sadness. Yeah. It's about Izvozchik, the coachman who has nobody whose son died and has nobody to speak to. And it's a very short story. It's one of Chekhov's early short stories when he was even not famous then. And this coachman's droshky driver, I don't know what they call him. He was in Moscow and he was in the cold of the winter. He was alone and he wanted to talk to people about losing his son. And all the people who were riding with him, they were, not interested in hearing him. They treated him really miserably. And the story ends that he ends up talking to his horse. So,
so it's a cabman in English, yeah?
Cabman.
And was it in Russian?
No, I read that in English, maybe 40 years ago, yeah. It made a big impression on me.
But what was the first story in Russian that you read?
Well, that would have been probably Skuchная Storia. In English,
sad story, yeah. Boring story.
Yeah, boring story, yeah, yeah.
Okay, and you said that you are interested not only in stories, but also in Chekhov's plays, yeah?
Well, yeah, of course, the plays are much better known in the West than the stories. So I was aware of the famous plays. I'd never seen any of them, but maybe on television. From time to time, they showed them on television, but yeah, I was more aware of as a playwright than as a story writer.
Maybe Cherry Orchard, yeah?
The Cherry Orchard, yes, of course. Yeah,
in Russian, Vishnyovy Sad.
Vishnyovy Sad, or Chaika, the seagull, was very famous. And then there was a very famous film that came out about 25 years ago, directed by Louis Malle. Dada Vanya, so Uncle Vanya. It's called Vanya on 42nd Street. It's an adaptation of Uncle Vanya, Dada Vanya. And yeah, that was I recommend. That's a beautiful movie. It's in English, of course.
And Odessans say everything has started in Odessa, yes? We are very proud of our city, and some places are very famous because of Chekhov as well, like Londonskaya Hotel, Severnaya Hotel, where he stayed here when he was on the way to the Crimea. And yes, have you been there when you were in Odessa?
I was very interested in checking that out. So when I was in Odessa, I went to the Londonskaya, and they have a special room. I mean, his room is all preserved, and you can go upstairs and see the room. Very nice room. And he used to stay. I think he stayed there on more than one occasion, because when he was traveling from Europe, he stopped in Odessa and then took the steamer to Yalta, where he had his house. So. Yeah.
Yes, and there is a small museum of famous writers and famous personalities who stayed there, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, film stars and writers and many famous personalities. And the staff of the hotel were very friendly. They showed me around, too. I came in, I asked them they actually sent someone to show me around. So that was nice.
Have you seen that memorial stone in Torgovaya Street where some cherries are in his honor, and where was the house of that famous girl Olga
Yes.
Vasilyeva?
Yeah. I looked for it. I went up to Grovaya Street, but I couldn't find it. But I remember you gave me the article that the theory is that Chekhov's idea for the cherry orchard came while he was staying in Odessa. So yeah, it was very interesting.
How is connected to Vishnyovo Sad cherry orchard? His
Can't
play.
remember the details now. I don't remember the details. It was an article about 3 years ago. This young woman who, I think she fell in love with him, and she was writing him letters, and she lived there, and she's kind of her.
It was her heritage, I think, yes,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
she wanted to sell it and asked Chekhov for help
Yeah, I can't
to
remember
do
the
it when
details.
he
Yeah, I can't
was on the
remember the
way.
details. Yeah.
When he
Yeah, I
was
can't
on the
remember
way
the
to
details.
Yalta, yes, and
Yeah.
he visited that house and even met the person who was the prototype of that old man in Cherry Orchard.
Okay.
Yes.
Fierce, I think. I can't remember.
Yes, fierce. Chekhov helped her, and
Okay.
even he met the guy from a real estate agency and asked him about the price of that house and gave some advice to Olga. By the way, she was in love to him, yeah?
Okay. Yeah.
And of course, everyone knows that when he was in Odessa, he visited Arcadia Beach with his friends from Writers' Circle here. And even he was traveling and met them there to drink champagne, for example, to meet actors and actresses who were very beautiful. And of course, Chekhov wasn't all that time, yes, and do you remember the story about champagne and his illness? I think these are interesting details about him, yeah?
Yeah. Well, of course, he was very ill from tuberculosis, right? He'd been diagnosed with tuberculosis already when he was a young man, I think in 1887 or 1888, but he tended to ignore it and didn't take care of himself. And he took this big long trip to Sakhalin Island, and so he ignored it until about 1897 or so. He had a big attack. He started spitting and coughing blood, and the doctor said, you have to take care of yourself. And it just got steadily worse. And but he was very in his letters, he's always saying, it's not serious. Or he writes to his family, I'm getting better, I feel better. So he was at that point married already to Olga Knipper, and they decided to go to Germany, but he was very, very sick already. This was, I think, in 1904, in the summer of 1904. And he went to, I forget, Baden, Baden-Baden or something like that. And they stayed at a hotel, very nice hotel. And he was writing letters. He was writing letters up until the last day of his. There's a letter 1 or 2 days before he died, and in the letter he doesn't say anything about being sick. He says, "Oh, we're going here. I like the German women don't dress well." It's not talking about, absolutely not complaining about being sick. And he had some kind of attack at night, and they called the doctor, and I think they gave him at the time an injection of camphor, which is, I don't know what that camphor was. That, you read short stories, the doctors always gave injections of camphor. Of course, Chekhov himself was a doctor, so he knew his situation. Yes, he couldn't deny it. And this episode we have, I think, from Olga Knipper. She's the wife of Chekhov, the famous actress, and she wrote in her diaries or letters.
Yes, she described that,
She described it. And I think even the doctor, if I'm not mistaken, even the doctor wrote something, because Chekhov was a famous guy. Anyway, so the doctor comes, it's like 3:00 in the morning. Yes, that's right. Knipper, Olga, she didn't speak German. She was from a German family, but she didn't speak German. So she was desperate when Chekhov got sick. And she couldn't find anyone to communicate. And she went up to there was some Russians staying up in the hotel, I think on the next floor, and they contacted the doctor for her. So the doctor came, and Chekhov was lying in bed. And when the doctor came, Chekhov said in German, "Ich sterbe," I'm dying. Okay.
Yeah, умираю in Russian.
Yeah. And the doctor gave him an injection of camphor. I don't know what that does, camphor, if that's a tranquilizer or what. Anyway, gave him an injection of camphor, and then they ordered a bottle of champagne, and they opened the bottle of champagne and they drank the champagne. And the explanation I've read is that in Germany, when there is a hopeless case, when there's nothing the doctor can do, they drink a glass of champagne. And so that was a sign that Chekhov was checking out, so to speak. And he said, the translation in English is, it's been a long time since I've drunk champagne. And he lay on, the story is that he lay on his side and he breathed once or twice and then he died.
Yes, I know that story, and it was very sad, but I think because of he was a doctor, he understood many things, yeah, and he managed to do many things during his life. I heard about he built some hospitals and schools, and but his life was so short for that, yeah.
Really. And he donated, he had a fund, he donated books to the public library in Taganrog where he was born. He had all sorts of projects. He built schools, in his neighborhood where he had his property. He was,
I heard, that American writer Kava, and he had an influence of Chekhov on his...
Well, Chekhov had a big influence in the United States. There are different, I'm not an expert on this, but I know that the Moscow Art Theater, the Stanislavski Moscow Art Theater toured the United States in the 1920s. 1924, 25, just around the time of the Russian Revolution. And they were a massive success. Okay. So they were performing Chekhov. There were a lot of immigrants, even from Odessa, many people of Jewish origin who were Russian speakers who came to New York, and they knew about Chekhov. They were performing in theaters, Russian language theaters, I think, and Yiddish theaters. I'm not sure, but I think they were performing Chekhov. I was reading recently memoirs by a person who grew up in Brooklyn. Alfred Kazan was a Jewish intellectual who grew up in Brooklyn. And he was born in 1915. And when he was a boy, he says he remembers people sitting at the dinner table 1921, 25, maybe 1925, and immigrants from Russian Empire. And they were talking about Chekhov. So he already was known in the United States. And he had a big influence on fiction writers. I think even today in America, a lot of people, when they want to write, they go to creative writing schools and they study Chekhov. He's considered to be the real example of the best.
Special course.
Raymond Carver wrote this famous story, and this story is called Errand, E-R-R-A-N-D, Errand. And this is a 5-page story about the death of Chekhov. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what would you advise to read to Russian language learners? Which Chekhov story?
I find personally the later stories easier to read than the early stories. So Chekhov wrote, he began writing as a medical student to earn extra money, and he wrote these funny pieces. He wrote a lot. And so the early stories are, for me, linguistically, as a non-Russian speaker, harder to read than the late stories. But when he was, the last stories, are linguistically not hard to read. So, let me think. One of the most beautiful stories is, in English, it's called The Bishop. It's one of his last stories. I think it's his second last story. It's about 5 or 6 pages. Very, very simple. There's a lot of terminology about, the church and sacraments and religious clothing in it, but it's very, very simple. It's about this story about this elderly bishop on, I think, Palm Sunday, the Sunday before Easter, getting ready for the Easter celebrations, and he's ill. Yeah. And, it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful story.
Yes, and maybe your advice is to go to the theater to watch his plays here.
Well, yeah, I think so, but I'm also a little bit concerned that a lot of modern productions don't really do justice to Chekhov. There's a lot of, and here, it helps to know Russian, and I think in Russia, Ukraine, people are more reverent about Chekhov. They respect him more. But, I've seen some really horrible productions of Chekhov. If you love Chekhov, then you have to be careful what you see, because there's some really, in some countries, they do some horrible productions of Chekhov. They don't seem to understand the text at all. So.
Yes. Thank you very much, Fred, for your taking part. Yes, and advice. And of course, I wish you to come to Odessa. And
I am planning to. Absolutely, it's a great city, wonderful, very interesting place, and I want to brush up on my Russian. I want to improve my Russian.
Maybe to find something interesting about different famous Russian writers here.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people are, who they choose to, it used to be, I don't know today, but 30, 40 years ago, you heard occasionally people would learn Russian to read the Russian classics in the original, but it's a big job to do that.
Yes. Maybe next time we will talk about someone else here.
Okay.
Thank you. Nice day. Bye-bye.
Okay.